Okay, Zok Tehillah Gemara. The last thing we learned was why is it that what is the machloikis between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabban and the Mishnah? Why it is that the chenveni does or does not have to pay for the glass, for the bottle? The Gemara answered, it's speaking by a case of shoyel shloimidas, where the chenveni used the glass to measure, to serve a different customer, and because of that, he's a shoyel shloimidas. If he's a shoyel, he just has to give it back to the tinnik. And if he's a gazlan, he has to give back to the violin. In our Shakla Bataria, at one point, the Gemara wanted to say that the shaila of the tzluchas, of whether or not the cheveni has to pay for the tzluchas, is due to the halacha of Shmuel. And it was speaking where the owner, the balabos who was buying the oil, also sold glasses, and he was sending this glass bottle with his son to try to sell to the Chemini while he would be buying the oil. So the Gemara now wants to delve down a little bit more into this halacha of Shmuel. Gufa, Omar Shmuel, Hanoitel Kli Mina Umen. If one takes a keli from the Umen, Levakra, to test it. In other words, he wants to buy the keli. And he just wants to make sure that it's not chipped or anything. And while he was analyzing the keli, the nenas biyadai, and an onion happened, it broke, a rock hit it, not due to his shi at all. Chayiv, he'll be chayiv. But that's only if they had agreed upon a price, or if there was already an established price by the time this happened. So it's a little bit confusing, the reason for Shmuel. So first I want to go back to what we learned on Pei Zayin Amud Beis, where the Rashbam explains the reasoning for Shmuel. And then we'll see what the Rashbam says over here. So the Rashbam on the Pei Zayin Amud Beis says, Kiddush Shmuel. So let's have a look at the Rashbam. He plukta the Rabbanon of Rabbi Yehuda. The machlokes between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda are about Shmuel's halacha, and that is the benetila. The moment this buyer picked up the bottle to check it out to make sure it's not cracked or anything, kana miyad. Why? Typically, you find an item on the shelf is not going to be damaged, and they'll want to buy it. And the Rashbam sticks in like we just learned in our Gemara. Of course, it's only considered bought if when I picked it up, I already knew the price and I was agreeing to the price. Now just a matter of the final inspection to make sure it's okay. So that's what the Rashbam told us over here, which sounds very much like it belongs to me. When I pick it up to check out, since I'm going to be buying it, I'm coining it now. So if something happens, it's my problem.
Why? If it's on the shelf and you look at it, you take it in your hand, you can't assume. You can't assume that he knew the price, but he didn't bargain yet.
No, it's speaking where the price would have been bargained and negotiated already. And the Rashbam says so beferish, the Rashbam that we're about to learn will say that. Yeah, speaking after all the negotiations, and there was already, now it's just a matter, all you're doing now is making sure that it's not cracked or anything. So let's have a look at the Rashbam over here. The Rashbam here introduces a different pshat. So the pshat that we know so far is that it works because I bought it. The kinyan happened already. Because in a second, I'm going to approve it anyway. So here, with this vav, the Bach addresses what the barrel is asking. I didn't bargain yet. So let's look at the vav. And the vav says, "V'hanamila dekitzi damel shekvar kana upasak damav kodim shenoitlam." We already made a deal that I'm paying this amount. They already did all the bargaining, and they already decided how much I'm going to pay. Inami shedamav ktutzim, or it's an item that has a very fixed price that's not negotiable. For instance, what are items that always have a fixed price that you don't even need to discuss because it's known what the price would be? A pepper mill, vishar kelim, another small kelim, shedakan la'olam losses b'poshet poshet. they're always given away for a specific price. There's no room for negotiation. Now, in the Gemara Nedarim, Dr. Rashbam, Muki lo lahadu Shmuel b'tara charifa. It's also speaking in a case where whatever was for sale, there's 100 people to buy it and jump for it. So I as the lokeach examining his keli is not doing him any favor because I don't need you to buy it. I have 1,000 customers that are lining up to buy this item. There's 100 customers ready to buy it. And because of that, there's no benefit to the moicher. This guy's picking it up. It's only for his own benefit. The moicher doesn't need him. Why is that relevant? Zok the Rashbam, umishum, since the lakeach is having 100% benefit from checking it out, there's no benefit to the moicher. So now the Rashbam is bringing from the Gemara Nedarim that the reason why Shmuel holds chayiv is not because he owns it. It's not because he was kohen. Rather because he has the din of a shoyel who's chayiv anointed. Because if there was benefit to the owner in me looking at it, so then maybe I'd be a shayim socher. But since there's zero benefit to the moicher, only to the lakeach, we treat him like a shoyel. But then the Rashbam at the end says, Inami, no, where is it over here? Second. The Imkela the Chayiv, then he goes weiter. The Taima Mishum, the Kaitzi Domel, there's a fixed price for this item. Uzvina Charifahu, it's something that anybody would grab. Therefore, Harehu Benetila Zu Kamoy Lekeach Gomer. So either it's like a Lekeach Gomer, like we learned on Amud Beis, or Inami Kamoy Shoyol Shal Chalano Shaloi. So it sounds like the Rashbam says there's two possible ways to understand Shmuel. Both reasons, independent of one another, would explain why, when you're checking out an object to buy, if it breaks Machmazon, is why you're chai. Either because you have the din of a shoyl, or because we consider the sale as having been completed already. Okay, talk to Gemara story time. Hahu Gavra, the Olabei Tifcha. Somebody went to the butcher store. Agba Atma de Basra. He picked up a piece of meat that he was considering to buy. Exactly like Shmuel's halacha. You picked up something, you're planning to buy it, you're just looking around to make sure there's nothing bad on this meat. The Hadidika Agbo, as he held it up, also parsha, some Ganev came along. Marmarin, they grabbed it away, which means the person who picked up the meat was an oinus, that someone came and grabbed it from him. So the question is, does the customer have to pay, or is this the loss of the chavani? Also, the Kamejar Viemar, Chayve Lishlume Demeh. He was Mechayev the customer to pay for this piece of meat in full, which supports Shmuel's halacha. But again, Shmuel's Tanai is it has to be that there's a sale there. It's only a sale if there's a specified price. So this supports Shmuel's halacha that when you pick something up to check it out, that basically you're prepared to buy it, you're chayev anoint. Hahu gavra, the icy ka'ari lefum nahara. Someone came with like pumpkins, and for some reason these pumpkins, everybody was jumping for them. Everybody wanted to buy them. Also, kula almost krokra. Everybody was grabbing and grabbing. Now he doesn't even know who has. There's a whole mob around him. And everyone's grabbing. Now he doesn't even know who has to pay him. It's out of control. Amalahu, he told the oilam, Harayin Mekdosh L'Shemayim, everything's hectic. So now everybody dropped it because who wants to have hectic? They start saying all these pumpkins, they're all chol of stam. Everyone dropped them.
Because you open up there.
Thus, so also look at Major Kahana. So they went to Rav Kahana. Amalahu, the Shiloh, are the hektish or not? He was makdishem. Do they have a din of hektish? So he told him, Ein Adam makdish dover sheni shaloi. It didn't belong to the owner anymore because we have a Shmuel's halacha that since they grabbed it and there was a fixed price on it and they were just checking it out, we don't consider it his. we consider it theirs. And therefore, his hektish is useless. So now they all drop the pumpkins, he can collect them back. The key to the Maya. That's, of course, only if there was an established price. So we consider it a mecher. That's the condition of Shmuel's halacha. But if there was no set price for these pumpkins, then for sure the people who grabbed them were not cutting them yet. And then in fact, B'shus Morayu Kaimi, they belong to the original owner. The Shaper Akdish and his hektish is Toifus, and Avada, these are going to be Kodesh, and now there's nothing he can do about it. Gewaltig. So I wanted to share a story talking about everyone grabbing schayra in a mob scene. When I was a Bocher in Israel, could be I was a bigger troublemaker than I should have been. And anybody who's been in Israel after Yom Kippur, between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, knows that around Kikkur Shabbos, all over the streets, there's a whole bunch of street vendors selling arba minim, selling sukkah supplies and schach, and they all have these bullhorns announcing to the public to come attract them to their booth. I remember they would say, Hadasim mehudarim mitzvat, or esrogim mehudarim mimaroko, and they're trying to announce, of course, in their mother tongue, in the Vrit, to get people to come. So there was one guy who was making these announcements, but Nebuch, he had no traffic. Nobody was coming to his booth. I felt bad for him. So I went over to him and I told him, I know why nobody's coming to you. Because all the people in the crowd, they're not Israelis, they're Americans. And they don't understand Ivrit. They understand English. So how about, let me make the announcement for you. I'll announce it in English, and then you'll get customers. So I make an announcement. Everyone should come here for free Adasim, and free Aravis, and free Asrogim, and free Ulavim. And all of a sudden, a mob started walking towards the booth. And the owner says, oh, Tadara Balach, I was so happy that I made a good announcement, everyone was coming. And then when I left, I don't know what happened after that. But I'm not sure how it ended. But there was like a mob scene, everyone was probably coming to take, like by the case of the Argamor here. Taner Rabbanon. Halakech Yerek Minashuk. What happens if you're in the grocery store and you pick up a vegetable because you're thinking to buy it, and you check it out and you don't like it? Ubira, you're checking it out, and you put it back down. No matter how many times you do this, you're not kind of, because you didn't decide that you wanted it. And therefore, now what does Meiser have to do with this? We're assuming, who is the Mishnah talking to? Who's the Brisa talking to? Someone who learns Brises, a Talmud Chacham. Who is the typical merchant selling groceries and vegetables and fruits? Nama Oretz. We know that if you buy Paris from a Nama Oretz, it has a status of Demai, and you're mechuyev to be mafresh maishros. So here, since you never bought anything, you looked at it, you were thinking to buy it, but you didn't like it, and you put it back. Avada, you as the Talmud Chacham are not mechuyev meiser because it was never yours. But what if you looked at this vegetable and gomar beliboy leknoisa? You decided, you know what, I want it, so you made a decision to buy it. Then you're going to be kind. Now that you're kind, automatically there's triggered a chiyuv for you to be mafresh meisers from this because it's the buy. And this chayv and meiser. Now, what if then you change your mind? So, I want to give it back. I don't want to take it. Lachzira yefsher. You can't just put it back on the shelf because there's already a chiyuv on you to be mafresh meisers. Shekfar this chayv and meiser. Ula asroy yefsher. I can't take 10% off of it, give it to the Levi, because I'm stealing from the vendor. I have to give it back if I want my money back. So what is he supposed to do? So haketad, ma'aisroi, you have to be mavish meiser and give the meiser to the Levi. Now, when you're returning the rest of it, you're not returning it in full. The noise is not to make meiser, and you'll have to pay a restocking charge. You'll have to pay 10% in cash to the vendor because that's what you gave away to the Levi. For the Gemara, I don't understand why there should be a chiyuv meiser triggered. I never owned it. Atu mishum the gomar beliboy liknois kana. Well, just because he was planning to buy it, that makes a kinyan. When his chayiv and meiser and his mechayiv and meiser. Now, this kasha is a very difficult kasha to understand because based on what we learned earlier from Shmuel, if you learn Pshat and Shmuel, is that once I pick it up to look at it, I'm coining it. So yes, you were koined. So what's the Gemara's hara here? Unless the Gemara doesn't work with Shmuel. If you hold Shmuel's only saying it machmas a shoyel, you have a din of a shoyel, then the kasha here makes sense. Because just because you're a shoyel, that doesn't trigger in you a chiyuv to be mafresh trumas and maisus. But the Achronim speak about this, and it's a little bit difficult. One of the Achronim wants to suggest that this was not like Shmuel's case. Because what happened was, in Shmuel's case, when you're picking it up, you're thinking to be kind. Here the case was, and it's a doichik to say, because meichetesa, but the case was, when you picked it up, you bedavka didn't have das to kind. Then, after you examined it a little bit, you decided, yeah, I want to be kind. But the problem is, you didn't make a kinyan anymore, because you made the hakbah before. So therefore, you weren't kind, and that's what the Gemara's kasha is. Just because he decided to buy it, where's their kinyan? Why should he be mischayiv and ma'aser? And for the Gemara,
deciding to buy it doesn't necessarily mean that you bought it.
That's exactly what the kasha is. That's the Gemara's kasha. So why should he be mechuyev and ma'aser?
Because if you decide to buy it, but you didn't do a pula to buy it, then
right. So you should not be mechuyev and ma'aser.
Yeah.
That's exactly what the Gemara's kasha is. So and for the Gemara, Amar B'Hoshia, Hachal b'Yirei Shemayim Askinan Kegoyin Reb Safra. There's a very famous story with Reb Safra. He was in the middle of Krishma, and he had an item for sale. Let's say he had a watch for sale, and someone comes up to him and says, I'm willing to give you $100 for your watch. He's in the middle of Krishma, he's not answering. So the potential purchaser thought that maybe he wasn't willing to accept $100. So he says, I'll give you $150 for it. And if Shavta says, Laman Tin, Viter, he's ignoring the guy. Okay, I'll give you $200 for the watch. I'll give you $250 for the watch. I'll give you $300 for the watch. No. Then he starts from an esrei. I'll give you $350 for the watch. I'll give you $400 for the watch. By the time he says, the guy says, okay, I'll give you $500 for the watch. Reb Safra says, the watch is yours for $100. Why? Because Reb Safra said, I was already masking at 100 to give it to you. I couldn't answer you because I was in the middle of davening. But since in my mind I was committed, I was makbid, I was masking, I'm going to sell it to you for that amount. The mere fact that I agreed, even though no kinyan was made, but since in my mind I had made up I was going to do it, I'm going to treat it like it was.
You don't find many like him.
You absolutely don't. Even in his heart, if he made a commitment, he sticks to it. So that's what we're talking about over here. The guy didn't make a kinyan, but he had planted by a vegetable. He's mechuyev in maishus. See, if this story happened to me, I would say pukvakert. Avada, I'm going to charge him the full $500. A carrot, the Rebbeinu Shloim gave me schar since I davened the kavana, and I wasn't mafsik for a good deal. Hashem made it that I should make so much more money. That's how I would verteich the story. But Reb Safra was such an ehrlich Yid, he didn't verteich it this way. He verteiched it that he has to give it away for $100. No, wouldn't we all say that? That since I was ehrlich and I wasn't mafsik, Hashem wanted to give me $500. I think that's how most of us would interpret this scenario. Zokt Gemara weiter. Chasitain. Chasitain is a major wholesaler. He sells a lot of schira, bulk items that he has to weigh and measure. Rashbam says, why is a wholesaler referred to as a sitain? Because sitain is the Greek word for wheat. And most wholesalers wholesale a lot of wheat. They wholesale other things as well, but they're referred to as a sitain. So the lacha is, he's constantly filling up kalim with different items that he's selling by the liter, by the gallon, by the volume. So eventually things start sticking to the side of this keli, and it's going to become constricted. So when you're selling a gallon, your gallon keli might not hold the full gallon because there might be stuff stuck to the walls. Therefore, once every 30 days, you have to scrub down and make sure to clean the walls of this keli. Ubalabayis, who doesn't measure so often to sell things from his house, it's enough once every 12 months because the likelihood is it's not used that often, not so much stuff gets stuck to the side of his keli. But Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, it's exactly the opposite. If you're using it every day, it's like self-cleaning. It washes itself out. So a sidon can do it once a year. But a balabais who only measures once in a while and it sticks there in the keli, that has to be done once every 30 days. Chenveni, the Rashbam says, Chenveni is l'chulu alma, even Rabbi Shimon Gamliel agrees to this. The kanech midoisav hamayim b'Shabbos, twice a week. Why? Zogt the Rashbam that the Chenveni is different because if you remember, we learned that a Chenveni is busy, and therefore after he pours out whatever is in the measuring keli into the customer's keli, once the flow stops, he doesn't have to wait till the additional 3 drops go in. Right? We said a Chenveni doesn't have to wait for 3 drops to go in, which means there's a buildup. There's a buildup of a gunk in his kelim. That's why he has to check it more often. His weights, so now we're not talking about volume measurements, we're talking about the weights. He has to scrub down and clean his weights off once a week because, again, if the weights get too gunked up, what's going to happen is when he's buying, he's going to be taking too much. The miznaim is the actual weigh scale that has like a receptacle in it to place the weight on one side and to place the merchandise on the other side. That's like a receptacle. It's a keli. Stuff builds up in there. It has to be wiped clean after each use. All of this discussion about wiping off gunk is belach. If you're selling something that's moist and wet, that will build up gunk. But if you're selling dry goods like fruit, like pepper, that don't stick to the sides of a keli, ain't it, sir? That does not require any type of cleaning. Turning on to Amud Beis. V'chayiv la'achriya lo tefa. This is a very interesting halacha. They used to use a balanced scale to sell. So let's say he was selling a pound of meat. So on one side he would put the pound weight, on the other side he would put the meat, and when the scales are balanced, that's a pound. Zok the Mishnah, you have to put in more meat than a pound in the side of the meat. So the side with the meat should be a tefach lower than the weight, meaning you have to actually put in extra meat. This might be referred to as a baker's dozen, but you have to put extra meat in. Now the Rashbam says this only applies where that was the minig ha'ir. If the minig ha'ir was to do that, that's when you got to do. But what if you were in a city where no, a pound is a pound? You still, even though you don't have to put more on the scale, but after you take the meat off the scale, you have to throw in some extra stuff anyway. Noishin like girumin, you got to throw in some extra stuff. How much? Echod la'asar balach. And the Gemara is going to explain what it means is, if you're selling 10 liters of a liquid, you have to add an extra 1/10 of a liter, which in fact is 1%. The echad la'esrim b'yavesh, which we're going to see either means 0.5%, which I think is the maskana, or it might mean 0.25%. And we'll see exactly how we get these numbers from in the Gemara. Makam shenahagu lamud b'daka. When you're selling something, let's say you're selling 5 liters. So you can either measure it in a 5-liter keli, or you could measure it in a 1-liter keli and measure 5 times. Now, normally when you fill it up, you put a little extra on the top. So if you're only doing it once with a 5-liter keli, yeah, there'll be a little extra. But if you do this 5 times with a 1-liter keli, you're going to end up giving more because you're giving extra each time. So therefore, he shouldn't use a big keli because it's going to be shortchanging the lakeah. Because that's going to shortchange the moicher. Limchak, if normally it's a flat top, it's not heaping. Lo yigdosh, you're not allowed to make it heaping because that's going to hurt the moicher. Ligdosh, if the minig is to give it heaping, lo yimchak, you're not allowed to give it flat because that would be hurting the lakeah. Gewaltig. So I want to start with a story. We're learning here about weights and measures. So there's a famous story about a baker that took the farmer to court. He told the judge, I think this farmer is stealing from me. Because every day for my production, I buy a pound of butter. And I've been noticing lately that the pound of butter that I was buying is getting smaller and smaller. Something's wrong. So the judge turns to the farmer and says, this is a grave accusation. I would like to see your weights, your pound weight, so I can assess it if it's exactly a pound. Maybe your weights are off. So the farmer says, I don't even use a weight. I don't have a weight. So the judge says, what? You just arbitrarily chop a chunk of butter? You're a crook. So the farmer says, not so fast, Your Honor. What I do is, every day I go to the baker and I buy a pound loaf. And I use the pound loaf to measure my butter. So you see from here, what goes around comes around. So Zok the Gemara, at this point in the Gemara thinks that we're looking for the reason of why is it that you have to put more meat on the weigh scale, that the meat should be a tefach lower than the counterweight. Amar Shlokish to Amarkra, it is Evan Shalema V'Tzedek. You should have a complete and a righteous weigh stone. Now, all it needs to say is Evan Shlema, and we would know that's what it means. Why does the Torah stick in the extra word V'Tzedek? So we learn from there, Tzadek Mishaloch V'Tein. You always have to give extra. A baker's doesn't. Always give more than what you're charging. That's a deraisa. If that's the case, if there's a deraisa to add more to the side of meat, the Sefer says, what if you weren't? What if you're giving exactly a pound? Then the problem is if you're telling me that deraisa, that you have to weigh down the side of the scale with the meat on, meaning when you're selling a pound, you have to give more than a pound. How could the Mishnah suggest a case where he's doing keneged halacha? He's measuring it pound for pound. Ella, what you have to say is reisha b'makom shenahagu. The reisha means in a place where to fulfill the Evan Shlema V'Tzedek, the minig was to put more meat on the scale. That's when you do that. But Rish Lakish is halacha, where he wants to say what's the makor of Evan Shlema V'Tzedek is that Seifa Itmar is going on the Seifa, where the minig was to do it exactly you like. The minig was to sell a pound for a pound. But you add a little bit. How do you know that you have to add? How much extra do you have to give? If you're talking about something that's liquid, it's 1/10 of a liter extra if you're selling 10 liters, which means 1 out of 100, which is 1%. So the question here is, from the pasuk v'tzedek, you only see you have to add a little bit. Where do you see a specific amount? So Tosha seems to learn that there is a deraisa, but it's a big shaila in the Rishonim if the deraisa is just to give a little bit extra, and the Rabbanon said you should give this ratio extra or not. So there's a lot of discussion over here as well if there's a chiyuv of achra. There are some achronim that say nowadays that people use like electronic scales, they don't use weigh scales, and you're giving exactly that amount of weight, it could be a problem. How many vendors today throw in a little extra? We don't. So it's brought down there. It's not done. However, there are those who learn that it's only midirabbanon, and could be it's not a problem. The other shaila is here is no, that was it. So that was the shaila, how you deal with it nowadays. So the Lamajin halach applies nowadays. American, you're supposed to do it, but could be not. Now the reason why it's supposed to be done, it's brought down in the Rebbeinu Gershom. The reason why it's supposed to be done is because, let's look at the Rebbeinu Gershom inside. I believe it's here. So first, Rebbeinu Gershom says this doesn't apply to selling precious metals. It only applies to selling food. It's impossible to be completely sifted out. There's some psilus there. So therefore, you have to give a little extra because some of what you're giving is psilus. Not everyone holds like that, but according to that shita, so that helps a lot for nowadays, where maybe things are perfect without psilus. Maybe it wouldn't be an issue, but there's a big discussion around how that would impact nowadays. Okay, how much do you have to give extra? Either echad la'asar balach, or ve'echad la'eshem b'yavesh, even a lesser amount by yom. Ibaylu effectively. Heichi ka'amar. Is it echad me'asar balach la'asar dalach, which is 1% if you're selling something wet, and the echad me'eshem b'yavesh la'eshem b'yavesh. So 1/20th out of 200 is one out of 20 is 1/400th. 1/400th is 1/4%. Idealma echad me'asara la'asara dalach, and echad me'asara la'esrim diyavi, which would be 0.5%. And the Gemara answers teku. Now this is mamish halacha l'maisa, right? So what do you do about a teku? So there's a very big shaila. Is this the raisa of adding tzadek mishalah? Is that a isur v'heter dik halacha? Is that a mitzvah? And then sofek the raisa l'chorma, you'd have to give the bigger amount. Or maybe it's a choshen mishpatikadin that you have to give a little extra, and then you say amoichi mechaber al varaya. Right? Sofek the raisa is l'chorma, but sofek mominus is always l'kula. So there would be a shaila as to how to approach this take. Zog to Gemara weiter. Amar Rab Levi said, Kasha Einshin Shel Midos, the einish for not being honest with your weights and measures is Yoser my Einshin Shel Arayis. It's even more serious than the einish of Arayis. Shazen Nemar Bahen El. Now it's El V'Loshen Choil, and if you look at the pasuk, it says Lagabe Arayis in Achim Mois Kedoshim. It says Ki es kol toy avos ha'el osu anshi ha'aretz asher lefneichem v'titma ha'aretz. So the to'evos ha'el is referring to arayis. That's what the Torah says when referring to arayis. But v'zen ne'emar b'hen, when the Torah refers to weights and measures, it says Eila, as the pasuk says, Ki to'avos Hashem alekecha kol oisei Eila. Anyone who does these things. So the extra hey shows that it's more serious. And the problem is, if El just means these, and Ela just means these, so the extra means it's more of these, not more serious. So we need a makar that the word El or Ela has a serious connotation to it. So to Gemara, my mashva da'el kashahu. How do you know El means tough? And he took the strong people of the land. So Ele stands for very, very strong. Now, Moshe Weinberg asked me a very good question. Why would we go to Yecheskel to give an example that Eile means strong? In the Shira, in Oz Yashir it says, Ozna Falu, Alufa Yadam, Eile Moyev. Right? There also means the strong ones. So he asked, why did the Gemara bring a raya from Yecheskel if it could have brought a raya from a Pasuk Chumah? I thought it was a nice question. Zok to Gemara.
Yosy, with these electronic scales that they use today, it's definitely, there's a big problem because they're charging you for the wrapper, the weight of the wrapper as well.
So it's even a bigger problem.
The bigger problem, that's right.
You're not getting extra, you're not even getting what you're paying for.
That's why Stroley, Olav Shalom, used to give extra.
Oh, wow. So it's Mamish Makayim this Gemara.
He always gave extra.
Wow. Beautiful. That's a beautiful story. Frank the Gemara, Gabe Arayis Nami Yoksiv Eila. It uses the word Eila by Arayis as well. It says, Kichol Asher Yasa, Mikol HaTayevis HaEila, V'nichras when the Fashas Oisos. Anyone who does one of these Averis, which is referring to Arayis, he has cards. So Gemara, Hahula Mute Midos Mikaris. That Eila isn't to tell you how serious it is. That Eila is to tell you that only for these Tayevos, only for the Tayevos of Arayis is there Kares. There's no Chiv Kares for the Avera of improper weights and measures. Frag the Gemara, Velomayot Fayu. You just said that the oynish is worse for weights and measures than it is for arayis. By arayis, there's a chi of course. By weights and measures, there isn't. That Gemara, the hazam efshe b'tshuva. By arayis, you could do tshuva, but not by weights and measures. And they were trying to explain. Arayis, if you do tshuva, you'll be misakin it. But the problem is, in order to do tshuva on your weights and measures, you have to be able to compensate every single person that you stole from. How are you going to know that? So the Gemara says, as an Eita, you should do things for the public benefit, but you're still not sure that you're going to get that you're paying people back. And because of that, there's no way to do tshuva. However, there's a very fascinating Tosfos that I think we should learn. Look at this beautiful Tosfos. Also, Mepshe b'tshuva. You could say you could do tshuva and you could completely undo and uproot and eliminate the aveira if you didn't create a mamzer. If one through his nose created a mamzer, that's a problem that you can't fix. So it's a little bit shverlich because by a rise it's also yefshus teshuva sometimes. Rav Chaim Omer, even though if someone was moiled a mamzer, it's something that he can't fix. The Ma'aser you could still be misaken davera complete with tshuva. Shetziva like Kadosh Baruch Hu. The Letziva Lalasas L'tshuva. The gears is a little bit funny over here, but the Rebbeinu Shalom said you could do tshuva, so you could do tshuva, and it'll be misaken everything. But by a Goslin, you can't do tshuva, not because the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't let, because it's physically impossible to do so. Our Goslin shetshuva hu sheyachshir akzela k'dichsiv ve'eshev akzela ve'echad the gozal arabim, and if you stole from the public, eino yoidei l'miyash, so you can't fulfill what the Rebbeinu Shalom says you need to do for tshuva. By your eyes, even if there's a mamzer, you could fulfill what the Rebbeinu Shalom tells you to do, the prescription for tshuva. But here you can't do the prescription because you can't be Meshav the Gzela. You have a gav damin yasa behen tzarchei rabim mikomokim lav tshuva mal Yosy. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman in Kovit Shurma has a little bit of a problem over here because he said even if there's a mamzer, you could do tshuva. Now the mamzer is still going to be there, but the tshuva works. The mekan labo you consider it is kosher. Even if someone was a ganav and he didn't pay back, but he did tshuva because he couldn't pay back because he didn't know, but he did whatever he could. Yes, he's still a ganav. He didn't give it back yet. True. But l'maisa mikanu lahabo, he's considered an elachid. It'll even be kosher for edus. So Rabbi Khan says, I don't really understand the difference between arayis and gzela because either way, there's a level of tshuva. Zogt helik gemar vayter. Zogt helik gemar. Amar Rabbi Levi. Kasher einshan shal midas yoysem einshan shal arayis. The einish. I'm sorry, I learned that already. We're a little bit weiter. Amar Rabbi Kasha Gazal Hedjit, Yoser Migesel Gavayna. Stealing from a Hedjit is even worse than stealing from the Rebbeinu Shalom. When the Torah talks about stealing from a person, there's Ishki Yechta Umala Mal Bashem. Even before it talks about the Me'ilah, it says the word Chet. That's referring to someone stealing from an individual person. But when you're being Moil B'Haktish, it says, it says, if someone, it says the Lashon HaPasuk is, Kisimol Mal V'chata B'Shkaga. So it says first the Me'ilah, then the Chet. So you see, it's not as serious. The Omer Rabbi Levi, Bo Ra'eh, come and see, and now it's Kamamish, the Lublin strikes again, because we're going to be analyzing a pasuk from our paragraph. Bo Ra'eh, Shaloi Kamidas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Midas Basar V'dam. A person's different. Moshe Rabbeinu's klolos were worse than the Rebbeinu Shalom's klolos. This week in Kisavai, we learned Moshe Rabbeinu's klolos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Barach Yisrael be'esher mishtayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu benched Klal Yisrael with all 22 oisiyos of the Aleph Beis. The Kilon, but when he cursed them, only b'shmoina. How do you see that? Baruch and be'esher mishtayim, because before the pasuk gets into the Klolos and B'chukaisai, it starts first with it starts with the good, how good it's going to be for us, the bracha we're going to have, if we listen to the Rebbe Yisrael. So it starts with Im B'chukoisai. What's the first word, the first letter? We see the bracha, the Aleph. Im B'chukoisai. And then the last letter, discussing the brachas of someone who follows the Torah, is Tov. So from Aleph to Tov, all 22 letters of the Oisios, of Aleph base, the full bracha is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu offers to us when we do the mitzvahs. But the Killah, when you look at the Klala, it's only B'Shmoina, only with 8 letters, because it starts with the Im B'chukoisai Timasu, it starts with the letter Vav, and the last words of the Klala was Ad Veschukoisai Lo Nafsham, with a Mem. From Vav to Mem is how many letters? Vav, Zayin, Ches, Tes, Yud, Chaf, Lamed, Mem. So it's only 8 oisios. The Ilu, Moshe Rabbeinu, while Moshe Rabbeinu, Baruch B'Shmoini, in this week's parsha, he only benched him with 8 oisios, the Kilon Basra Mishtayim, but he cursed us with all 22 letters of the Aleph. How do you get that? And now we're quoting Sukkim from the parsha we just laid. Baruch B'Shmoina, going on to Peitas Amalanav, from V'Hoya Im Shemaya Tishma. So it starts with a Vav, V'Yad L'Ovdam. So Vav until Mem, we already discussed it, 8 oisios. But the Kilon Basra Mishtayim, because the Klala starts on V'Hoya, starts with the Vav, and Tishma ad the Ein Kaina, the last is the Hey. So it's Vav all the way around to Hey. So it includes all of the letters of the alphabet. Toysus here says something fast, and it's mamish negay to us. This week, the next Shabbos that we're going to have is Shabbos Shuvah. It's the only Shabbos in between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot, because the next Shabbos is Yom Kippur. So what do we lane? Shabbos Shuvah. We're going to lane Nitzavim Vayelach. Now, what would be if Rosh Hashanah was on let's say a Wednesday and a Thursday? No, it would be impossible. A Tuesday or a Wednesday. What if Rosh Hashanah was a Tuesday or a Wednesday? So that means there'd be one Shabbos of Shabbos Shuvah, which would be the next Shabbos, and the next
Shabbos is not Shabbos Shuvah. 2 weeks of Shabbos Shuvah, day after Rosh Hashanah.
You're talking about now,
yeah.
This year. No, but I'm talking. What if on a year where Rosh Hashanah was Tuesday and Wednesday, right? So then the following Shabbos would be Shabbos Shuvah, right? Then Yom Kippur would be on Thursday, right? Because if Rosh Hashanah is Tuesday and Wednesday, then you have Shabbos Shuvah. Then the following Thursday is Yom Kippur. Then you have a Shabbos in between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. And that makes it very hard to build your Sukkah because you have so few days. So sometimes you have one Shabbos between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, like this year. But some years it works out that you have 2 Shabboses. When you have 2 Shabboses, what do? Do we lay on one Shabbos Nitzavim and another Shabbos Vayelech? No. We actually lay Nitzavim Vayelech. I'm sorry. So I'm getting confused. We're going to be laying Hazinu. We're laying Hazinu Shabbos. Right. Nitzavim Vayelech is this coming Shabbos. Hazinu is what we're going to be laying the Shabbos in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, or between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot. There's only one Shabbos where we lay the parsha because Yom Kippur is Shabbos. So the only Shabbos that's in between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot is going to be Parsha Hazinu, right? But what if there would be 2 Shabbos, right? So then, what we could really do is we could read Nitzavim. We would be able to, if there were 2 Shabbos, so the last Shabbos would be Hazinu. Hazinu is always the last Shabbos, but the first Shabbos we could lay only Vayelach. Sometimes it's something very fascinating. The Kilam Be'esher Mishtayim Mivahayim Shemoya Mikan Ein Nira Lari Pirish Rabbeinu Nitzim Goyim. From this Gemara, it seems like we don't hold like Rabbi Nitzim Goyim. The Pirish, because he explained the Haide Mechalkim Vayelech Me'atem Nitzavim Kishiyesh Shtei Shabbosos Ben Rosh Hashanah LaSukkos Below Yom Tov, in a week where there's 2 separate Shabbos between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot, we lay Nitzavim Vayelech the first Shabbos, and then the next Shabbos we learn Hazinu. Af al pi no, sorry, we don't need Tzavim. We learn only Vayelech, and in Tzavim we learn the week before. So when there's two Shabbos in between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot, we learn Vayelech, not Nitzavim Vayelech, right? So we split up Nitzavim Vayelech when we always split up Nitzavim and Vayelech when there's two Shabbos, because we only want to learn Vayelech after Rosh Hashanah. We don't want to learn Nitzavim after Rosh Hashanah. Even though Aval Bishi Parsha Ketana, why would we not put two parshas that are really small together, like Nitzavim and Vayelech, and then what we would do is we'd be able to split up Matis and Masay. If we had to choose which two parshas to put together, wouldn't it make sense to put Nitzavim and Vayelech together and learn Matis and Masay separately, which are so long? But we don't do that. We learn Matis and Masay together so that Nitzavim ends up being the parsha before Rosh Hashanah, and the first week after Rosh Hashanah Shabbos Shuvah, we're going to learn Vayelech. And Hazinu will be the next Shabbos before Sukkot. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? We want to lay Nitzavim b'davka before Rosh Hashanah. You know why we want to lay Nitzavim before Rosh Hashanah? Because Nitzavim also has in it an element of Klala. She is Klala Batam Nitzavim. We don't want to lay Nitzavim after Rosh Hashanah. We want to lay Nitzavim before Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, if we had two Shabbos between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot, we only lay Vayelech. And we split up Nitzavim from Vayelech. We don't lay Nitzavim Vayelech that week. Why? Because we don't want to lay Nitzavim after Rosh Hashanah. Why is that inconsistent with our Gemara? The Hachamashma, the Loikari Klalois, Ella, Be'im Vichukaisai, Ubai Kisavai. It's much from our Gemara that the only two places you find Klolos in the Torah are in Kisavai and in Vichukaisai. The Ka'amami Ve'im Lois Tishmu, Advein Kaina. Avamishon Veilach, Lechashivi Klolos. Obviously, we don't consider after the end of the Klolos in Kisavai, we don't consider that the Klolos continues into Nitzavim. So therefore, I disagree with what Nisan said, that the reason why we don't learn Nitzavim after Rosh Hashanah is because we don't want Klalois, because clearly from our Gemara, those are not considered Klalois. Avol Nirleri, the Lahachiyah Nukarin La'olam Atam Nitzavim L'fnei Rosh Hashanah. You know why we b'dafka learn Nitzavim before Rosh Hashanah? We don't want to learn it after Rosh Hashanah. It's Kedei Lahavzik B'Parsha Ben Klalois T'Shana Sha'avra T'Vahaya Kisavai L'Shana Haba. I consider Nitzavim part of the Klalois, but we want to separate the Klalois of Nitzavim of the last year and the next year. The parsha ben Klalois the Shana Shavra the V'Haya Kisavai l'Shana Haba. We actually want to have a separation. We want an extra week to separate. Kisavai should be further away from Rosh Hashanah. That's why we always learn Parshas B'Midbar before Shavuos, because we don't want to go from Bechukaisai straight into Shavuos. The Lahavzik ben Klolos to in Bechukaisai Latzeres Shu Roshana LaPeres Ilan Shedidayin LaPeres. Lachizim Mesech Megillah the current Klolos of Teres Kanim of Natzeres. The same thing, we want to have an extra week between Kisavai and Rosh Hashanah. That's why we stick in Nitzavim first. Okay, Gavaldik. It was very interesting. We should have a wonderful good Tavach, a bench Tavach, a Mazel Tavach, and Baruch Hashem should help that all the hostages should be freed, and Klal Yisrael all over the world should see peace and security, and we should be zoichet to be as Mashiach.
Amen.
Yosy,
Yes.
I wanted to give you an aura. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, you know, I'm glad I was sticking in Lubavitch.
Yeah.
He used to say that he had the thing about the Rosh Yeshivas and the Mashgichim and the Litvish Yeshivas, that before Rosh Hashanah they give Musa to the yeshiva, and they tell them how bad they are and how they should do good for the next year, the coming year. And he always said, the Lubavitcher always said, not an Elul, not an Elul. Not the Erev Rosh Hashanah. Don't make the Morish Haradik Erev Rosh Hashanah. the Rebbeinu Shalom is in the Gamas in the Feld. We can betten from Rebbeinu Shalom wus me will, Elul. It's easy. He's there. Don't make it so tough for them.
As they say, by the Chassidim, Al tifnu el ha'alilim. Mach nicht kann avoid the zura von der Alilim, von der El. Nicht so.
That's right. Yeah. But I heard why Jacobson brings it over, and they replay it now during Elul.
That's an important lesson. We should, instead of being so preoccupied with our affairs and maybe even feeling distant from Hashem, now's the time to jump in.
Jump in, yeah.
Embrace us. We should all be zoichet to get close to the Rebbeinu Shalom. We should take full advantage of the El.
Yeah.
They say it's like a campaign. You know, you want to speak to the prime minister, you can never get to him. You call him on appointment, but when he's campaigning, anybody can go over and talk to him. The Rebbeinu Shalom's campaigning now.
That's right.
Now's the time by that campaigns is when the politicians make promises. And now Hashem can make the promises for us, and the Rebbeinu Shalom keeps his promises.
That's right. That's right. No, Mr. Hope magazine you are.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.